Welcome to the Value of Recruitment podcast with me, Jon Brooks. Sponsored by Atlas, the recruitment platform helping you become an AI-powered recruiter. This week, my guest is Miles Hunt, founder of Benula Capital investment firm, chair of AppsGo Global, and founder of Empresaria Group, to name but a few. Miles shares his global experiences of recruitment, from Southern Europe and South America through to Asian markets, and even laying the groundwork for a functioning recruitment industry in Indonesia. We talk about the evolving services that recruiters offer, based on the changing needs of our clients and our unique position to both act as a guide and also deliver solutions for changing markets. Miles brings a unique set of insights from around the globe and through his various roles as recruitment founder, investor, and advisor, and gives us a fascinating perspective on how recruitment might evolve. Enjoy the show. I hope you find it valuable. Miles, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, John. Lovely to be here.
No, brilliant to have you here. Obviously, you are a founder, a recruitment founder, an investor, an advisor to agencies around the globe. So you've got a lot to share in terms of how you see the value of recruitment. So let's kick off with the big question. In your eyes, how valuable is recruitment?
So I'm hoping that the first question and the roundabout answer I give to it isn't sort of, we don't see it as being indicative in my approach to answering questions. Generally, I'm really direct, but I'm conscious, having had a quick look at some of the eminent people you've had on the podcast, that there are different ways to go and skin a cat and different ways to answer the question. And I think some context to this maybe might be relevant. So the reason maybe I'm on this podcast is because, unlike some of the eminent people you've had either in industry bodies or founders of large recruitment companies, I've had sort of a mixture of all of those, but really everything with an international focus. So Empresaria, building that business up was very much sort of going onto the stock market to raise money to invest in the emerging economies of the world, as well as the emerging staffing markets. So the early 2000s were spent in places like Indonesia and Chile and Finland and Japan and places. And I think it's the relevance of those experiences and how that might tie back into someone who owns an agency, maybe here in the UK, that might be sort of the relevant context here. So if I start off, rather than looking at it, how valuable is recruitment to a client and a candidate, and how valuable is it as an industry? How valuable is it in terms of the pounds or dollars that actually it makes, either in a macro or a micro fashion? I can come back to that. I think I'll start with an experience in Indonesia. So in 2004-05, we set up 2 or 3 staffing companies, recruitment companies in Indonesia, a permanent recruitment company, a contract recruitment business, and actually also a corporate training business. At the time, there were only a handful of recruitment companies operating in a country with a 250 million population, partly because in 1998 there was the great Asia financial crisis, which Indonesia was one of the hardest hit, and all the multinationals, with I think the exception probably of Adecco, who we took their country manager from to form one of our companies, everyone had fled the country. And what was interesting, and again, this is my shaggy dog story, but with relevance to the question that you pose, is that when we set up these businesses in Indonesia, there was very little demand for recruitment services because people didn't really understand what it was that they did. There was no underlying regulation, or not just in terms of recruitment and staffing, but actually in terms of employment legislation. There's really just a blank page. And when it came to the demand for staff, yes, there was demand for some of the certainly multinational companies operating in Indonesia, particularly in Jakarta, for qualified accountants or tech staff, or some of the oil and gas and sort of the mining industry. But actually knowing exactly what a recruitment company did or didn't do, you were actually creating a market. And from the first things we did, and actually the first time actually took a sort of more holistic view, was we promoted the creation of a staffing industry association, or an association to actually help explain to legislators and to people in government as to what the value of what we did of what the value of having some form of regulatory framework around just labour laws as such, what that would actually mean to the economy and to society. Because with 250 million people, you'd have thought, therefore, there'd be just this huge demand for either particular skills in certain areas, or people would be wanting sort of help with career development and opportunities to go and further their career. But they just didn't understand what it was that we might be able to do for them. And in the absence of any real structures, it was very difficult to offer anything, because you weren't, in terms of how you priced things, which is what you focus on, the basis on which you actually created contracts, the extent to which they could or couldn't end up becoming, just because of the osmosis of legislation over time, legal or illegal. So creating some sense of framework was really important. And the benefit of actually working in those early days on those really early foundations was that it really helped, to some degree, I think, in a small way, it helped create a framework which then resulted in the maturing of that economy in the labour market, certainly, because some of the mistakes of other countries and some of the lessons learned in some countries which went down a very sort of regulated and restrictive model weren't certainly initially taken in that country. And it's sort of fascinating, sort of seeing the genesis of an industry in a way which I know you had Alec Reed speaking eloquently on this podcast some time ago. Somewhat he would have seen from the 1960s and 70s, before my time in the UK, when there was regulation, but it was a really basic sort of understanding as what it was we're trying to achieve. And what's happened over the course of time in every society and economy that's actually developed more sophisticated intermediaries in that recruitment staffing arena, is that they have really started to distinguish between legislation around protection of workers and workers' rights, which in some societies, the social demographic models of particularly Southern Europe, for example, and South America as examples where this has really taken root, have predominated against the sort of more Anglo-Saxon sort of the freedom of contract and freedom of markets, which has been more focused around enabling the movement of workers and allowing the regulation of or helping to promote opportunities in particularly sort of skill shortage areas. It's been really interesting seeing how that's worked out in some of these developing economies and societies in real time, in a way which we take for granted here in the UK. Because we're operating within the regulatory environment, we're operating, things change, things move. But seeing it from afar and using that Indonesia experience, you really understand the value that we have to society as a whole, and particularly to economies as they're developing, and the value we can offer through the insights that we have. And then actually, once you actually have an established staffing industry, how that itself can actually therefore help the more rapid development of that economy through the better allocation of labour to the markets where that labour is needed. So, in a roundabout way, I'm answering it with an international flavour. There's all sorts of insights from some of these different countries. And what's interesting, equally, if you, as I'm sure some of your listeners will do, if you're operating in France or in Spain or in Argentina and Chile, Argentina's maybe a slightly different case these days, but Chile, or you're operating in Japan, where the regulations are significantly more onerous, compliance requirements are significantly greater than they are in the UK, that actually sort of seeing the different approaches that have been taken and seeing the implications in the behaviours of clients and the behaviours of candidates, the behaviours of governments, and the extent to which value is attributed in different ways to what we do in those different markets. I think it's really useful to have some of that insight across companies here in the UK, because you can then start to see how you can apply some of the experience of these other countries and the kind of companies that operate in these countries, how you can apply that experience to actually help influence your own market, or actually take advantage of that market, or to see where you can add most value and actually get most return on the investment you make in what you do. The behaviours are going to be very different in France, where it's a risk aversion. How do you offset risk to a third party that can manage employment risk for you, to a US staffing organization where it's how do you actually find the solution to your talent needs in a way which is the most cost-effective way and gets you competitive advantage because you've got the people other people haven't got. It's very different dynamics. That's a very roundabout answer to your question.
No, but I think it's a huge point. I think it's so easy to focus on your own market and your own business, the day to day. And if everyone around you is treating the market in the same way and treating recruitment in the same way, you don't notice the differences. So it's only by stepping outside of ourselves, of our bubble, and say, well, hang on, it's a great example. How did they do recruitment in Chile? I don't know. How did you found the beginnings of a recruitment economy in Indonesia? There are so many lessons to learn there. That maybe you can't see if you're just thinking about your own market. So this is exactly why you're here. We want to tease more out of you. Thinking, obviously, you still work with UK agencies and you have that global experiences. Can you think of 2 or 3 specific things that you've learned from other markets where you've then said to a UK recruitment agency, right, let's look at this. Having seen how this has worked in X country, we can look differently about how we do it in the UK.
Yeah, well, I can again sort of do a macro and micro thing here, because at one level, one of the other benefits you get from spending time in overseas markets and spending time in different societies is the cultural influence. Because whilst we might look at through the lens of how we see our market and the value that we offer to our clients and our candidates in this market, it might be sometimes very different in different societies. And I think part of this goes back to the philosophical view which I've formed over time. I'm probably shared, I'm sure, by other people on your podcast, is that the long-term success of any company in our industry, in my view, and I feel very strongly, is based around seeing money, you might call the value, financial value, being created as a byproduct of doing the right things rather than as an end in itself. Far too often, the focus, certainly when it comes to prominent media focus, if you like, of people in our industry, is through the look what I've achieved. Here's my fast car, straight my holiday and whatever, or my X amount of rewards because I've got these amount of offices around the world, which is great, but often sends a mixed signal, sometimes a poor signal, which is that should what we'd be striving for. And the story I tell, and it's quite interesting, this story, because it's one which I think others have used it and adopted it occasionally, and I love it when it gets when someone takes a good story. I don't mind not being attributed to it, but it's a story that happened to, again, one of my Indonesian companies. So I mentioned we had a contract recruitment business which wasn't particularly successful. It was run by a local Indonesian partner. It was in the sort of customer services, financial services, sales and customer support sort of markets. And it wasn't growing very fast, and we felt it should be growing faster. The other 2 businesses were doing really well. And so I was getting to the point of thinking, how do I have to intervene? Because it's not growing as fast as it should be. And the approach, the approach to Empresaria was very much autonomy and responsibility, local autonomy, local responsibility, decentralized model. So it wasn't my approach to go and intervene unless I really felt I need to. And then the guy who was running it informed me that he was actually going to be away for the next 6 weeks, because he was actually, as a good Muslim, Indonesia is a Muslim country, he was going to go on his Hajj, his pilgrimage to Mecca, which happens you do in your lifetime as a Muslim, and he'd be away for 6 weeks. So he went away for 6 weeks, and I got a call. This is sort of pre-Teams, and these are in online video conferencing. Got a call on his return saying, "Miles, I'm back, and we need to have a proper conversation when you're next here, because my view on the business has changed." And what transpired was that in having counselling as a family, they're on the way that they're going to Saudi Arabia with the imam, who obviously not being particularly commercial, had just been asking what it was that he did. And he said, "I'm a recruitment consultant." And of course, he said, not only was there no recruitment consulting businesses in Indonesia, but not surprisingly, someone who works in the spiritual realm was not going to understand what this guy did. So he explained what he did, and he explained that he found work for people, and that clients that needed people, he found them business. And so the Imam said, so what you're really saying is that you provide food for the wider family. You help put food on the table, which is one of the pillars of Islam. He said, well, I suppose I do. To which he was essentially berated for why are you not doing more? Why are you not sending out the word that this is something which everyone should be doing? And when he got back to Jakarta, there was the Imam and various acolytes were there sort of berating his consultants that they should be working harder because this is a really good thing to do. Now, I'm conscious that this is getting into the realms of spirituality and religion, and I'm not trying to get into those realms. I'm not also trying to suggest that we're all on a mission from God. But what it really represents to me was how different people can see the same, through different lenses, the same truth, which is the impact that we have on the lives of people around us, and the motivations you can get from having a sense of higher purpose than just making money. And, to a case in point, this business went from being 100 odd contractors to several thousand contractors in the next 12 months because of a sense of purpose that didn't exist before. There's a sting to tell. If you're feeling that you're on a mission from God, you're not necessarily focused on your margin. So pricing may be something he needed a pricing consultant to go and help him that. So that didn't help. But the point is, I suppose, is that was a particular example of a cultural interpretation of what we did, in this case, a spiritual, religious interpretation, which I'm not trying to suggest that we should all be following the same sort of view, but I think is really interesting how you can use that parable, to use a pun, if you like, or metaphor, to represent why what we do is important and has value beyond the financial.
Yeah, what a great story, and not one I'd heard. I haven't heard similar stories like that. I mean, to continue the puns, I'm all in favor of preaching for how valuable recruitment is. I think a lot of us, the phrase is, "Oh, we fell into recruitment." So whether it's with an imam or whether it's with friends, family, or advisors or whoever, taking that step back and thinking, what's valuable about this? How important is this? I mean, this is why I set up this podcast, is to have these conversations.
Well, if you take that, I mean, again, we're talking macro. I could ask you some sort of other examples. I can give some micro as well. But to take that one to its next level, that's logic conclusion. When I do, one thing, the roles I have with some of the companies that I invest in here in the UK is to do sort of an induction, sort of quick induction, 15 minutes to people who are joining, and I think they quite often get berated with the sort of this is our cultures, our values, and this is what we want to do, and this is the process. And quite often I tell that story I just told you. And the reason I do it is to, again, get into the next step, which is how do you practically take that insight or that illustration as to how people can perceive that we have such an impact around us into your day-to-day job when you're being KPI driven and told to, it's all about activity and this is what you need to be doing. And this goes to the value, I think, that we offer to the candidates that we sometimes select out of job opportunities because they, for whatever reason, don't fulfill the requirements that our clients are looking for or we're looking for. And sometimes also those that do, is the insight we can give as to what it is that's going to help them be successful in either a job application or in the career path they're taking. We often get really poor press, and my APSCO role, I chair APSCO Global. The APSCO role, we also see insights into some of the feedback we get from surveys of candidates that are dealing with our industry, is that they're treated as commodities. They're seen as being sort of just the next route to the next commission check for a recruitment consultant, and it's terrible to be sort of seen that that's the feedback you get. People say, but because it's the reason I can see part of it's short-termism, part of it is because we are financially motivated, individuals are financially motivated to go and get the sale. But it's also because we actually filter out, our role is we filter out, as our clients want to do, to get the people got the right skills, because they're wanting us to get the people with the right skills. So time is not spent on those candidates that aren't necessarily the ones that fulfill the criteria, exactly criteria we're looking for. But what we can do, and it takes no more than 10, 20 seconds, is use the expertise we have and knowledge we have in the market and why they're not successful to give a tip. either on the CV format, the skills that they aren't highlighting, the experience gap that they've got, the sense of where the market's moving and it would be helpful for them to go and look at, or maybe opportunities that could be more relevant to them. And giving just a little bit of that insight will actually enhance the experience of that candidate and change potentially the perception of you as an individual and the company you're representing and the industry and the profession that we all represent as well. And the flip side of that is that I've seen a number of really successful recruitment consultants, permanent recruitment consultants particularly, here in the UK, who have been, I'm not saying they're flipping candidates on from one job to the next on a regular basis, but they've probably represented the same individual 5 or 6 times over 10 years, because that individual will only want to be represented in the market by that consultant because they perceive they've got their interests at heart. Yes, they're being paid by a client. Yes, they're working on a mandate maybe, but actually what they're really also is interested in is seeing this individual do well. So it does pay off in spades if you look at it that way as well.
Yeah, and I think you can do both things. You can be honest about saying, look, I'm being paid by a client, but I am still interested in the candidates, the people in this market.
Because just a little bit of sprinkling of joy you can provide, which actually make you feel good at the end of the day, and it only takes you, 5 minutes of conversation outside of all the different, just for a number of people that you speak to, it just makes you feel good.
I think that's it's a great tip to say, just give a tip. And actually, the experience isn't always great. I talk a lot about how do we stand out, how do we differentiate ourselves. If generally the expectation is low, and you say, as you say, it might only be 20 seconds of saying, look, if I could give you one tip, it would be this. That person might take that on throughout their career, and they will always think of you. And that is a huge difference and adds huge value. And
go back to the value point. And I know we're sort of talking around the subject, and I probably missed responding to the question you sent me sort of 5 minutes ago. But one of the greatest value propositions we offer to people in our market, and it's just the candidates and the clients, is the insight we have based on the role we have as that sort of market narrator stroke consultant that knows what's required by the clients and how to find it, and what is needed by the candidate in terms of skills to fulfill the needs of the client, and what pay and the current market rates are for pay and everything else it might be, such that clients often, I think one of the greatest added value opportunities, certainly within the specialist staffing sectors, is, without breaching any client confidentiality, is to be able to give an insight as to what's going on in a way that LinkedIn and its Talent Insights product can give something in terms of data, but that insight is actually a confluence of all those data points with some form of interpretation to be able to give an overview of what it actually represents. And that's something which is worth a lot of money to a client, but they don't pay for it because it's never wrapped up in package, or very rarely, unless you're in executive search world, rarely actually sort of wrapped up in packaged and priced accordingly. And for a candidate, again, who's sort of thinking, what do I do go next? Well, you've got an insight into the world of, as a recruitment consultant, the world of work and the work their particular area they're working in, which could be massively valuable to them. It's a question of how you find someone to distill that and make it sort of transmittable and communicable in a way which doesn't take a lot of time or effort.
Yeah, you hit on a great point. We can't always charge for the value we create. You can't price up everything. We have to choose a way of pricing. But that doesn't mean to say that the value is only based on what we price on.
It goes back to some of the ingredients for being successful in this world. And I can talk. Everyone will have their examples of consultants who make lots of money. And I got, particularly in the executive search world. I know one individual that's billed £4 million a year in net fee income, so it would be the same thing as sales in an executive search practice every year for the last 5 years. He does actually charge for his insights, but it's partly also because he's so understanding the market, he's so well networked, he so knows his market, this particular individual, that the companies obviously want to get sort of some sort of contractual arrangement to try to stop him from sort of being able to take their staff. So it's partly part of that as well. But the point is that you can package it up, but it has to be perceived to be so valuable in financial terms that an organization is willing to pay specifically for that service.
Everyone is talking about AI-powered recruiters, but what does that actually look like? With Atlas as your CRM, it means every interaction with your candidate is automatically captured and searchable. If they mention their salary in an email, it's instantly recorded without you having to write anything. And behind the scenes, Atlas discovers every company that a candidate has worked for, the industries those companies operate in, as well as things like company size and description. All this means you can do your job much faster and add more value to your clients. To learn more about Atlas, go to recruitwithatlas.com. A couple of other things. I loved you use the phrase market narrator. I don't think I've heard that before, but I really like that. Yes, we've got those insights, but we can tell stories. We can narrate what's going on in the market. And you talked about LinkedIn insights. Yeah, they're great. That data is always there. That data is growing, obviously. But you need to turn that data into a story, or someone needs to do that for it to be understood. And I think that's where recruiters sit. Yeah,
so
that data.
I'm sure you'll have had the conversation in previous podcasts about the threat of technology and AI and disruptive nature of it. And I'm sure you probably had a few old dogs like me who've been around for a while, so who've heard this story all the time from the mid 90s onwards, that we're going to be disintermediated by XYZ. I always think that the advantage that we have is that we have the ability to apply these new technologies and be at the forefront of them, and to act as we can distill the best applications and apply it to the benefit of our clients. Why is it that LinkedIn has spent the first essentially 12, 15 years of its existence focusing on building relationships with the recruitment community? I know it's going now enterprise more than it obviously has done, but it's because it's the appreciation of the fact that we're the ones that are going to use those tools in a way that an in-house talent acquisition team are not going to necessarily do. The same when it comes to the application. Some of the AI and tools that AI related or AI light that are coming through, we can harness those and get an understanding how to apply and link one to another in a way which I think clients will find it very difficult to do. Certainly not in a holistic way, and certainly not when it makes sense, because by the very nature of it, any one organization, unless you're Amazon, say, aren't going to have the scale to represent making that investment in a way which the recruitment industry, in its broader sense, will want to do.
Yeah, and sometimes I hear recruiters saying, "Oh, it's worth us investing in an expensive LinkedIn license," whereas a hiring manager, it's not worth it for occasional hiring. But it's not just an investment of money; it's an investment of time and expertise. There won't be one AI tool; there will be thousands, most likely, and to sift through those and get really good at using the best ones when you find them as a hiring manager is just an exhausting concept when hiring is not your role. Yeah.
So again, there are two things. I know we're sort of segueing to different subjects, and I've taken over probably the agenda here. I apologise, John, but I would suggest that there are two things that are at the forefront of most of the strategic discussions that I see happening, and I'm involved in the companies that I operate with at the moment. Aside from financial pressures and interest rates and balance sheets and all the rest of it, there are two things. One is AI and how that is playing out and developing as an opportunity and potentially a threat over the course of the next 12 months to 18 months. But the other one, which is particularly relevant here in the UK and particularly relevant given our most recent budget, is offshoring and the use of international mobilization of staff and workers and the use of resources overseas, and which again comes back to the international theme. One of the businesses that I set up back in 2005 was a company called IMS. Many of your listeners will probably either have used them or come across them. They're one of several, but they're probably the largest of the Indian offshore businesses that support the recruitment industry here in the UK, but also around the world. And they've got many thousands of people now working out there in India. Now, whether it be India or be the Philippines or be South Africa or be Eastern Europe, one of the other things is that there are incredible skills out there, which, again, video conferencing and all the things that we're using on this podcast, the technology we can use there does give you access to skills either for your clients or directly for yourselves as organizations to help you to scale up faster with a lower cost base and a more flexible cost base. And that's the other thing I think that's a real feature and function of just the changing use of technology and the international applicability of different skills and talents.
And that's where I think the consulting value comes to the fore for a recruiter. If we're offshoring, it's less about placing a candidate in the UK, so it doesn't feel like a placement. But if we're doing the hand holding with a client who's never done offshoring before, but we've seen one of our other clients do it, or we've done it ourselves because we've used offshore resourcing, for example, we can say, oh, I can support you here. I can help you. I can help you not make the mistakes that I made, or I can show you how other people in their industry, the direction they're going in, and help you do that.
Well, again, there are different ways of looking at it. At one level, you can say absolutely you can act as a guide to open up the world of opportunity when it comes to offshore opportunities. But equally, you can actually start adding it as an arrow to your own particular quiver of services, so that let's talk about the way that the industry is developing. It's developing in different ways, and I'm sure probably you've had the old chestnut about is it recruitment, is it something else, whatever else. I'm sure you had that conversations before. And in my view is that there will be a change in definition. We will evolve into something. I don't know what it might be, but there will be something in the next 20 years, because it is so much more than just transactional recruitment that we will do now. But one of the things that one of the directions of travel is you go further up the added value food chain. So people, whether it be in the perm world going into sort of the HR consulting route, or if you're in the contract world going to more the statement of work or the hire, train, deploy route, or whatever it might be. Certainly when it comes to moving away from sort of transactional, just dealing with line or going through procurement as just a tier 1, tier 2 supplier of recruitment services, looking at more an embedded solution or some sort of form of managed service related sort of element to what you do, or in the case particularly in the US and some of the markets where they've really got sort of intermediaries, not just managed service intermediaries, but they've got portals, for example, where everyone's just recruiting through a software portal, some recruitment portal. Well, they're doing everything at a much lower cost because your margin is so much lower, and finding ways of actually delivering a solution that could be less sophisticated but at a lower cost, rather than necessarily one that's added value through some the proposition you're offering. Again, whether it be technology or you use a South African stroke Indian stroke Philippines based resourcing model, or these are where you can suddenly say, well, I can do things different. I can find a way of adding value without necessarily having to to take a cut on my own net margin or to have a negotiation on pricing, because actually there is a way of doing it where it's not just technology related, it's actually using a lower cost base. And again, the one thing that came through from board meetings that I was in the UK in November, following the budget we had in October, is that this employer national insurance change that they've had here is just working everybody up to the fact that, hang on a sec, if they're going to be taxing ever more employment, we've got to look at ways and means of finding lower cost solutions, and offshoring is one of those ways to do that.
So that's there's so much going on. I mean, may we live in interesting times, as the proverb goes. That's the macro direction of the industry. Whether it's what we do now or it's what we evolve into, there's still a really big question about how do we stand out? How does an individual agency stand out to a potential client? So if we all evolve into some kind of offshoring support thing, or if in the future we come back to recruitment, classic recruitment, we need to stand out. So Talk us through how, when you've founded businesses and grown businesses, how have you stood out from the competition to win business and grow?
So the first starting point, which I think some people quite often forget, and I think the more time you spend in a large corporate, I think you become almost inured to, is that we're first and foremost a people business. And therefore, people are going to make the difference in some shape or form, whether it's because of the energy they provide, the personality types they have, the communication skills they've got, the values that they hold. And it's getting in front of people. So again, that's why we've always had that sort of the challenge of lockdown and remote working and work from home and all those things. It is very much a people business. So I think I've probably been personally involved in maybe 75 startups over the course of 30 years. So setting up new companies in the recruitment sector. Why would you be setting up new companies in the recruitment sector given how competitive it's all becoming and everyone's now talking about value? Well, there's always an opportunity, whether it be in sectors because there's particular demand and you've got people with particular experience, or it's individuals who have just got something about them in terms of that entrepreneurial flair, the drive to build a business, and the people skills, and hopefully the management skills, but they tend to necessarily come with time and experience. So the view I have is that getting a business going from the beginning, certainly I look at the stage of life of businesses, not just recruitment companies, but generally businesses, in terms of the number of employees you actually have, internal employees, building it to 25 people, which is sort of manageable by an entrepreneur, by entrepreneurial drive and flair, is actually, not say it's easy, but it's something which someone can do even in a really competitive environment and a competitive market. And that goes for recruitment companies as much as it does for any other type of business. And it's wonderful to see someone get to achieve the success that they can achieve through building through their own drive and determination. And so that's the first thing to say, is that if you've got that drive and determination, you can have success and you can build business, but you've got to be motivated and you've got to know why you're doing it, and you've got to have a sense of purpose, and it's got to be meaningful to you in terms of what the outcome of that's going to be. It's difficult to get someone to do that for you as an employee if they don't say, we'll see, it's beyond a short-term bonus. So that's the challenge. But then getting from 25 to 50 people requires investment in infrastructure. It's the systems, it's the processes, it's the consistency of approach, it's the ability to build in people around you who can actually help manage and grow that business. And again, you get plateaus of probably 50 to 100 people, gets plateaus, you get to another level of investment. And not all companies that are successful to 25 people are the ones that are going to be successful to 50 to 100 people strong, because often the control freakery sometimes kicks in by the entrepreneurs who just want to continue to be the person that's spinning all the plates, when actually what you need to be able to do is to delegate to others to go and do that for you. So in terms of, therefore, how to distinguish yourself, how to differentiate yourself, how to be successful and add value in a really crowded market with how many thousands of agencies out there, people skills and the ability to engage with clients and actually demonstrate an affinity. And it's hopefully based on not just personality and personal relationship, but based on something more than that. So skills, experience of the sector, understanding of the client needs, being able to match that client's needs with the candidates out and the candidate pool out there, and a solution that makes sense to that client. That's all part of it. But it's all comes down to the starting point is to people skills and the people component. If you go then beyond that, we touched on something having the insight of a sector and specialism in a particular area. The fact that you actually are sharing that insight and that industry narrator helps, because you're creating, it burnishes your own credentials. If I was to go and maybe sort of suggest a couple of things which may takeaways for listeners to the podcast from what goes on internationally, the few things that we don't necessarily do so well because of the way we're structured as an industry here in the UK is we don't necessarily know how, or some people find it struggle to work in a more regulated environment, and we are becoming a more regulated industry in a marketplace, employment market here in the UK. The hurdles we have to overcome and the risks now that being taken sort of can put people off developing in certain ways. But I would suggest that there is much to be gained and much benefit to be had becoming masters of that regulatory environment. And you don't have to know it personally. You just have to bring in the expertise around you And you can do that through, AppSco. Obviously, I represent. I know you had REC, Neil Carberry, recently, the REC again equally could provide you with that framework. But getting yourself to the point where you are able to do it like a judo roll and turn that to your advantage. This is if you're a French recruiter or an Italian recruiter or a Spanish recruiter, that's where you're operating, because the clients themselves are really worried about some of these risks, and their default position will be just don't do anything, which doesn't help them, which we found this with the IR35 problems the last few years. So if you can become not just understanding of it, but you can actually turn that to your advantage, be able to explain how to manage within it, and to explain how you can assume some of the risks that they're worried about managing, and why you can give comfort that you can manage those risks well. That in itself, I think, in the next coming years, particularly in this current Labour government that we have at the moment in the UK, will, I think, set you up really well, because that's something which I think is one of the cause of greatest concern for clients, is that they just don't want to be assuming risk.
Yeah, and whatever market you've been in, whether it's perm or temp, risk is always part of that. I think for, let's say, the average UK recruiter, we probably see the temp side of recruitment as the more legislative, the more regulated, the more risk focused. From my perspective, I love the analogy of the judo roll. Yeah, the visual there. It's tackling that challenge head on, turning it to your advantage, and then taking it that final step and realizing the value you're creating. So in some agencies where they do temp, and they do temp well, there's almost a level of exhaustion to say, right, we've finally got all the legislative stuff right. We've jumped through every hoop. Fine, we know there are risks around. If we get our rates wrong and our margins wrong, we might lose money. Even there are internal risks as well as risks for the client. There's sometimes a danger that you don't then take that final step to then say, right, let's package this as a high value product.
Well, I think this is, it goes back to, you don't need to be massively sophisticated to be able to make the leap, but you've got to be open to it. Is to start looking outside the tram lines of just temporary contract recruitment, because if it gets, I'm sure this again, you've probably had conversations with previous contributors to this podcast, but the opportunity now is to actually look at it more in terms of contingent workforce planning, or workforce planning per se, is being able to actually sort of navigate then between the self-employed route, the employer of record opportunities, the extent to which you might go down a sort of a project augmentation with the delivery element, so a statement of work, so a wrapper, the extent to which that's purely going to be augmentation rather than complete solution with milestones, and understanding how those different business models and work methodologies play out, gives you an opportunity to then pitch and maybe look at what you're doing in a slightly different light to the one that you've been doing it so far, but more importantly, be able to demonstrate to a client that you can help them understand the differences and why it might be financially, and more importantly, probably from a risk management perspective, legally better to go down one route rather than another.
Yeah. And as you say, the clients have two options. As the regulations come in, as it becomes more complicated, they either do nothing, which does not forward their goals, or they find someone to help them.
Well, that's the challenge we have as an economy and as a society at the moment, because we are facing a significant raft of things coming down the pipes and tubes, which are going to give hiring organisations pause for thought as to whether they want to go down this path, which could give us a more bigger problem than just the staffing and recruitment one, just in terms of getting a more sclerotic, sort of rigid labour market, which won't help us as an economy. But this is where I think, by taking it both as a personal and as a collective challenge, to saying, well, let's get across this. Let's all individually and collectively take responsibility to understand what other countries that have got similar types of regulatory environments, how they operate, and what we can be doing either as a from a sort of representation to government through our trade bodies, or whether it be individually through the way we actually sort of look to navigate this with some good legal support and compliance support, there are going to be significant opportunities, but it won't be binary. Again, if you take the French market or the Italian market, they're dominated by larger recruitment companies, and there aren't the same sort of the small agencies that we've got in the UK, because the compliance risks are so much greater than the requirements for you to actually demonstrate that you can manage that risk. Germany is a case in point. I mean, I bought in Germany rather than set up in Germany. Same in Japan. It's a market where you've got to demonstrate that you've got the compliance infrastructure in place from a very early start. So the barriers to entry become greater. But if you've got an established operation in the UK and we're going down this path, all I'd say is it will be one of the implications of a greater, more highly regulated market is it will act as a consolidator, and you either step up and you embrace it and you gain share at the expense of those that don't embrace it, or you're probably going to become roadkill at some point in the future, or you're going to have to operate in a very niche area to survive or find other ways of growing. So I would just strongly recommend it's something which you want to get across, and obviously there are resources around there and ways and means of getting across that quite quickly, but don't hang around.
Yeah, well, and without jumping back into the technology discussion, there are so many solutions now that make it easier as a smaller agency to do things that in the past have only been done by larger agencies. I think that's a really useful perspective, because I think a lot of the trend or the outwardly, a lot of people have talked about UK agencies focusing on America, as it's easier. The regulation's not there. It's a great market. It's a great market to work in. But actually, the opposite is also true. If the UK is becoming more regulated, then how do we learn from France and Spain and Italy and others to continue to succeed and create value in the UK?
Well, I think it's two sides of the equation, isn't it? I mean, again, I'm sure you probably spoke about it elsewhere, but we haven't talked about that. The value that we offer and we add to the industries, staffing industries and markets and clients in other markets from the UK. That's one of the benefits of being, maybe aside from the Dutch market, the most intensely penetrated staffing market in the UK. We're probably double the level of penetration of the US market, although that's twice the size of our market, but 6 times the population. Is that the level of competition and the need for that competition driving innovation, and the micro specialization, the segmentation of our specialist markets particularly, and the fact there is no service sector tariff trade restriction to operate across in the States from the UK, certainly from a perm recruitment perspective, and other markets, not just it could be Saudi Arabia, it could be other parts of the world. That's something which we have been. It's one of my most successful exports. I don't think necessarily gets the attention from government and from the wider business world than maybe we should, because we've been one of the most successful elements of the services being exported overseas from the UK, because we are such a competitive industry, and we've been so successful in internationalizing our businesses in the recruitment industry. One reason why I'm APSCO Global Chair, because actually all our members, 70% of APSCO members, have got operations outside of the UK. They want to have reps, and they want to know what's going on outside of the UK. So, absolutely. I'm not, by saying we should strongly consider working out how to manage in a regulated market in the UK. The other flip side of that is we can also look to actually how we can take all our expertise and make more money, be more successful in other markets. America being the main one that everyone uses as examples, but European markets, Middle Eastern markets. I've even seen some successful recruiters from the UK operating in the Asia markets. Renewable energy in Taiwan. Amazing. Why not?
Yeah. Well, the world is our oyster. Should we wrap it up there, because we've covered so much? I feel like there's so much more to talk about, but for this for this podcast. Let's leave it there. Miles, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your global perspective on things.
My absolute pleasure, John, and thank you for asking me onto the podcast. It's an honour.
Thanks again to Miles for his unique insights as a global recruitment founder, investor, and advisor. 3 things stood out for me. First, the memorable anecdote of the pilgrimage to Mecca and the realization that we provide more value than we often realize. Miles then asked the question, how do we apply this thinking to our day-to-day behavior? Second, Miles's description of recruiters as market narrators. In a world of increasing data and technology, our clients value someone who can turn insights into stories that help them understand their challenges and how they can solve them. And third, the changing nature of our markets and how we react to those changes. Miles used his global perspective to illustrate the ways recruitment agencies can adapt and succeed. If you found the show valuable, please leave a review and remember to subscribe or follow the show on your podcast app. You can also get more insights and inspiration by signing up to my added value emails on Substack. You can find the link in the show notes. Now, go create some value. Thank you to Atlas for sponsoring the Value of Recruitment podcast. To learn more about how Atlas is creating an AI platform that helps recruitment agencies generate more placements with less effort, visit recruitwithatlas.com.